business, this limited itself to compliances. Now, it was only in the early 90s when the international institutions like the UNFCCC, which got formed in 1992, that there was some focus on environmental and social goals for governments and for businesses. The MDGs, the Millennial Development Goals, which were formed at the start of the century in 2000 with a timeline of 2015, were there, but they were also largely directed towards the developing nations. And of course, they had a significant impact on the ozone depleting substances. However, the impact was very localized and very limited. So the traditionally the businesses have worked on the singular bottom line of making economic profits. The concept of stakeholder engagement, materiality, integration of ESG issues has been overlooked even till today. It's only now after the Paris Agreement in 2015 and the adoption of SDGs by the UN again in 2015 that the governments have begun to focus on this integration, and therefore there is some responsibility which is expected out of businesses. However, it is still not regulatory, and as a result, what we can see is the CO2 levels in the atmosphere have gone from 180 ppm in the ice ages to 409 ppm. It is over 409 ppm currently. 9 out of 10 people are breathing air which is exceeds the WHO guidelines for safe pollution levels, and 7 million people are dying every year as a result of diseases which are because of air pollution. Similarly, 1 out of 3 people in the world do not have access to safe drinking water, and 2 out of 5 people do not have access to hand washing facilities. And more than 673 million people still practice open defecation. So, this is the value that we have created. Now, I'm just referring to the latest IIRC framework which has come out. It talks about value erosion. So businesses have not focused on value erosion. So while they have created value for one stakeholder, which is the investor and perhaps also the customer, they have not focused on the value that they have eroded out of the environment and the society in general. So these are the and as a result, you can see that now things have started changing. There is a lot of campaigning and rallying around this subject, especially after 2015, which was a landmark year with the signing of the Paris Agreement. Before that also there was, after the UNFCCC got formed in 1992, there was Kyoto Protocol, there was the Copenhagen Agreement. However, they did not have the kind of broad-based effect that was intended. And it was only after the 21st conference of this body that there were about nearly 197 countries agreed to take actions to limit the global warming. And also the adoption of the sustainable development agenda. When you're talking of the international instruments, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 identifies climate change as one of the biggest challenges currently. Also, if you look at the risk report, the global risk report by World Economic Forum, environment and climate change are the biggest risks, even more than societal or technological, even worse than terrorism, both in terms of likelihood and risks. And there is this report by World Economic Forum again, which has come out with a scorecard saying that GDP is no longer an adequate measure of a country's prosperity. So they have come up with a scorecard which lays out four aspects, which is people, planet, profit and the role of institutions. So they are saying that GDP is a very, very inadequate measure, and both governments and businesses need to focus on all the three bottom lines for a successful value creation. Also, last year in the Davos conference, the World Economic Forum get together, which happens every year, the purpose of business was redefined. Instead of being for creating financial value for investors, it was redefined as creating holistic value for all stakeholders. So, it was like the turning of the table by 180 degrees, from a investor based focus to holistic value creation to all the frameworks. And then secondly, there is a lot of activism amongst the youth, the millennials. Greta Thunberg is a public figure that way, who are raising their voice, and they are asking questions, especially to our generation, as to why we are leaving a planet in this condition to them. So, Sriram, the question here that you asked, clearly the trade-off has been for the environment and for the people in favor of profits, and we stand responsible for that. And like I would quote Gaurav in yesterday's panel discussion, he said that हमारे Mother Earth की तबीयत खराब हो गई है. So our Earth is sick, but the Earth will regenerate itself. It is we who are going to go extinct, and we have already shown a lot of tardiness. हम लोग बहुत लेट हो चुके हैं अभी के अभी एक्शन लेने में हम लोग ऑलरेडी बहुत लेट हो चुके हैं. और जो यूनाइटेड नेशंस की रिपोर्ट आई है 2018 में, उसके अनुसार it is most likely that if we continue our behavior in the same way, and our planet is going to be 3.2 degrees warmer compared to pre-industrial levels by the year 2100, and 1.1 million species are going to get extinct. And with coronavirus, the health and economic outcomes of the coronavirus pandemic, it is needless to say ki kya hoga. We don't even know what scale of impact it has had till now. So, it is nature which has really brought us down to our knees. The tables have turned. It's already too late. तो अभी ट्रेड ऑफ करने से कोई फायदा नहीं है. वी हैव टू go into integration. We have to practice materiality. We have to integrate ESG issues into businesses. We have to take actions for adaptation and mitigation. And some of the solutions that I think would help are, number one, every business needs to do a climate modeling, environmental impact study, and do a mitigation. उसको strategy में integrate करना होगा. Instead of just focusing on financial results, you also have to put a price to the natural resources that you are using, and also take actions to mitigate the same. Carbon sequestration, the cost of carbon sequestration currently is somewhere around $90 to $230 per ton of CO2. It is something very expensive, but this is the only solution to control global warming. Now none of these mitigation actions are going to help us. Rainwater harvesting, afforestation, renewable energy efficiency, fuel substitution, waste management, circular economy practices have to be integrated, and there is no trade-off. It is all in our favor. If we want to save the future, if we want the human species to survive, we will have to change the way we do our business, and we'll have to align ourselves to the international instruments like the Paris Agreement, the India's commitment to the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Agenda, especially SDG 13, which talks about aligning your integration of climate change into your policies, awareness raising, and enhancing the institutional capabilities on climate change. So this is all that I had to say, that the solution is integration and not trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the valuable insights. And once again, I just want to let everyone know that we have started recording the meeting. I hope that all of you are okay with that. And so now coming to Srijamala, ma'am. Srija, you have a lot of experience, working in various different industries, and even within your industries, you would know the struggle a sustainability professional is facing, trying to uh, make management understand the incentives for doing sustainability. So Priya ma'am just now mentioned that the companies have done a trade-off till now where profit was preferred over other pillars of sustainability. So, as a response to it, what do you think, are the incentives for the manufacturing industry or, any industry to restore ecosystem? So, given that, profit is a primary motive, what are the incentives? And, what could motivate the industry to reduce the negative impacts at the ecosystem? And as a continuation to the question, you may also answer, whether government should assist and co-finance the restoration process and in developing alternative resources. Is that something that industries are looking forward, and what are the incentives?
Thank you, Shri Ram, for asking wonderful question, and thank you, Priya ma'am, to give a very good context and start. Especially, you mentioned about uh, Earth will recover, Mother Earth will recover. It is us actually who has to who have to think about it, like how we are going to survive. So it is whenever we talk about industry, manufacturing industries, it needs how we are operating. We require resources, we require various resources, and all resources are coming from ecosystem, nature, whether it is a forest based or petro based, or whether water, energy, anything you talk about in any manufacturing industry, in any industry including service industry, we require resources, and most of the resources are coming from ecosystem. Let me bring out some facts and figures for future scenarios. Like by 2050, the world population will cross 9 billion. Living standards are rising, and we have seen as living standards are rising, consumption is going to increase, and demand for resource intensive goods is going to increase. By 2030, the global food requirement will go up by 35%, water requirement by 40%, and energy requirement by 50%. So if we the way if we are doing business, the way we are manufacturing, I will not say these are the incentives, these are the requirements why any business or any industry look into sustainability for a say. uh, One side we are seeing that demand is rising, on the other side now we don't have enough resources to meet the demand. It's just a supply chain demand, right? As ma'am mentioned, or as you were talking about the profit based earlier we were working mostly towards the profit oriented, and it was demand supply requirement. Now sustainability is supply demand requirement. I'll just bring out some of the associated risk, sustainability risk or environmental risk. Those are rising, and it is getting attention from investors, lenders, regulators, and these risks has potential to threaten the license to operate. Risk that has risk with the tied with the perception of overconsumption of water, and at times risk of actually overconsumption of water. Reputational risk linked to investment of project with potentially damaging environmental consequences. uh, the sustainability or environment risk register is actually very broader. Additionally, I would like to highlight some of other risk which has risk to financial performance with the volatile energy prices, infrastructure damage because of the weather events that we have recently seen in recent cyclone in Orissa as well. There was 610 crore loss of infrastructure damage loss. And also technological shift, compliance risk triggered with the new carbon regulation, risk from product substitution as consumers switch to more sustainable alternatives. uh, the way the way our previous generation has consumed, this newer generation is actually looking in a very different way. They are more informed, they are more conscious, and completely let me tell you this: complete organization industries are working to cater our future consumer requirements. The environmental issues now in this point of the time is actually impacting business in both way, directly and indirectly. Also, our stakeholders are becoming more conscious, looking for more sustainable business. Generally speaking, earlier it was presumed that sustainability is a cost center. Recently, we have shifted our thought process like sustainability is to create value. And if we closely observe ecosystem restoration, sustainable approach, these are the business requirement. Moving to how industries can contribute. For me, I believe there are three fundamental ways. First is reduce the impact of the operation. That is, reduce the impact of industry altogether. There are different ways, a different approach different industry will take. Some has higher impact in their value chain. Some have a higher impact in their own operation. Some of the approach like moving to cleaner fuel, renewable energy, zero waste to land discharge, use of product in your own operations, rainwater harvesting. These are some of the ways, but the fundamental is to reduce the impact of your own operation. uh, a lot of organization now they are committing to become net zero by 2050. There are organizations who are talking about now we will become carbon neutral by 2030. So those aggressive commitments are being taken by organization. It's not just because it is actually just because it is good to have, it is actually must to have. Then they reduce the impact in your own value chain. This is very, very difficult to achieve. I must say it is very difficult to achieve, but it requires good policy. It requires alternate source innovation that you have to make your own value chain in a reduce environmental impact. And last, I will say, provide sustainable product to customers, and most importantly provide them complete information to have complete transparency so that your customer can have informed decision. Now customers are becoming very, very conscious about it, like from where they are taking it, how their suppliers are performing, how their value chains are performing. So this transparency is actually required, and in coming upcoming years you will see that in along with the labels, like these are the ingredients of the product, you will also see these are the carbon footprint of my product. So these changes are coming in the market so that even consumer can have informed decision. And moving towards I will not take much time. Moving towards the question of the government. Actually, government is a major stakeholder and major driver for the industry. Even industry, like in India, we have mix of, we have large scale industry, we have small scale industry, we have medium scale industry. And if we want everyone to excel in a sustainable way, we need to have a better policy. We need to have a technology transfer. We need to have policy implementation. This cannot happen until unless there's a government intervention is there, especially in terms of see now I will give you just an example. Now climate change is actually no, it's very it's very progressive or very burning issues for everyone. And here if you see we in technology front, if we see, if I have to go or choose for an equipment, I will go for natural gas. But is it actually carbon neutral? Is it not having any impact? It's not like that. It's also limited resources. So here government intervention, government coming together, doing some innovation, bringing new technology to the market is actually very, very much required. Some industries, some companies are very large, but there are on a small scale industry or your medium scale industry which require a collaborative approach from all the stakeholders and along with government. So that's all from my side. Thank you, Shriram. Over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving this insight. You are telling that a lot of incentive for the company is basically to reduce the risk in the value chain. So that's the primary motive for the company. And we also mentioned while talking to the person yesterday that the companies are starting to report.
Sriram, your voice is cracking.
So I'm really sorry. So it's raining here on the
Yeah,
substation. So
now it's better. Yeah, just hold
yeah,
the
so
mic close to
yeah.
you.
So, ma'am, so even yesterday you mentioned that the companies are more reporting on forest disclosure of CDP. So I see that there is definitely more interest in this area from the companies. So Gaurav Anand sir, there is something that we would like to ask you. So given that you are in Tata Steel Utility Service Limited, which is this way, uh, I mean, although companies are doing a lot on reducing their footprint or ensuring that they do not have negative impacts, but finally the positive impacts which would do well for the society come from township management. So, one of the major changes that we are seeing in the last 100, 200 years is the emergence of technology. So, how do you think that development of robotics and smart technology solve the problem of dramatically increasing environmental pollution of natural ecosystem? And in your experience in Jusco, how have you seen technology play a role, play a major role in all these positive implementations?
Thank you, Sriram. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for the wonderful question. Taking the lead from what Priya and Srijamala stated about, the carbon dioxide concentration reaching up to 409 ppm level, and the population of the world in last 200 years getting 8 times more. However, the area remains the same. So the population in 1800 was 1 billion, and in 2020 it is almost touching 8 billion. 8 times. Area is same. So yeah, technology, you asked that how this development of robotics and smart technology can solve the environmental pollution. Partially, yes, a little bit, not much. Going further into that, measuring and monitoring the nuisances, nuisance in the sense like environment pollution, is basically the first step towards mitigating it, as I understand. And as you know, that for measuring the air quality, you take it PM10, PM2.5, SOx, NOx, water quality like dissolved oxygen, pH, turbidity, chlorine, anything you think about, there are sensors to measure that. So smart technologies are making us, are enabling us measuring it, like how much pollution there is. But robotics has driven some changes in the society, has transformed little bit of lives as far as these environment pollution is concerned. But at the major to the major extent, I would say no. So taking few examples from my experience, like nowadays when you visit a town, we call a city a smart city, where there are smart meters, smart street lights, GPS system enabled vehicle tracking system. So there are so many technologies people have started using it. But when you look at the extent of those technologies helping reducing the environment pollution, you'll find a very small change in that field. So I'll take few examples. One good example of that is garbage segregating robots. You might have heard about it. In some of the countries, they are using these robots. Like humans can't segregate at their home. They actually they mix the garbage and then they give it to the door-to-door collection people. Then what a robot does, it segregates into different segments of like paper, plastic, glass, metal, organic waste, and furthermore. So this is one of the examples where you can see that, yeah, the robotics and smart technologies are making difference. Another example I would like to take, that there are, like, if we send somebody to measure the water quality at some point of time in some water body, he'll say that, yeah, water quality is good. You cannot rely on him that, yes, dissolved oxygen part of the river is quite good, so don't worry. But the fishes are dying. It means that the dissolved oxygen level is not good. So there are some human errors which can be avoided by using these sensors, these smart technologies. Nowadays, you would have seen that the disasters are taking place in last 10 years. If you see, there are so many storms, tornadoes, and this type of natural calamities have started growing in more numbers. So there also, if you see, there is a robot which searches for the survivors in the aftermath of an emergency more accurately, efficiently than the humans. So there, yes, smart technologies are helping. Nowadays, smart technology like smart robots are also used in firefighting. So there are several examples already existing where technology is playing a big role. And by that, I would like to say that yes, this robotics as well as the smart technology, it has the potential to positively transform the lives and our work practices too. And it will raise efficiencies and safety levels and provide enhanced level of service. But yes, we'll have to plant the trees. We'll have to keep our water, uh, you will not have to make it dirty. We do not have to throw the waste in open. So there are some practices which will have to adhere in order to reduce this environment pollution and to keep a balance between the environment and us. Then only everything will be possible. So just stopping over here, and I would like to take questions after this panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sriram. This was what. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for explaining, how or will the technology play a good role, going forward, not just for township, but I think the same can be used by all the companies and maybe leverage something from there. So my next question is to Ashish Ranjan, sir. So, we saw all the panel members speak, and Priya ma'am was clearly mentioning how, the profit was preferred over other pillars, and Srijamala ma'am was also speaking about, companies recently wish to reduce the risks, right? And there is less opportunity for the companies when you look into it. So, as a person who has prepared sustainability PNL, right, the first ever PNL, which has gone for Harvard case study, do you think that companies can actually start including sustainability metrics in their P&L statement, especially about ecosystem restoration? Is it possible? And if it is possible, what all indicators should be represented by the companies? What all KPIs has to be utilized by the companies?
Thanks, Sriram. Thanks for the question, and also thanks a lot for having me here. Basically, the question is very, very important right now in the current context of things, given that now sustainability and ESG are taking center stage in decision-making processes. I think it's very important to answer the question of how to value sustainability. And before I get to the how, I actually wanted to take a step back and talk about the why of it. So why should you value sustainability is a very important question to answer. And I think the most important point to note here is that you won't get, and I'm talking about this strictly in a corporate sense. Why would a CEO listen to you if all you talk about in terms of sustainability is in terms of, say, a COD or BOD level of water, or tons of CO2, or how much of training or safety related aspects you are providing to your workforce only in terms of those metrics, unless there is a financial value attached to it. The CEO will not have that much of an attention span to listen to you. I'm going to quote a couple of examples here which are going to prove my point. The first one, we are working with an African company which is into the production of cocoa. And they have availed for a loan of around $300 million from a consortium of banks in Europe. And one of the preconditions of that loan is to implement sustainable farming practices. Now, what happens is, if this company is able to meet those targets, they get a 15 basis points reduction in their loan interest rate, which is basically translating into nearly $450,000 every year of savings, with a minimal amount of investment of less than $100,000. So basically, you have a 4.5 times return on an annual basis. And this basically gets the CEO's attention. So ever since we have been working with them, we've always been talking to the CEO. He takes direct interest into things that get implemented on the ground. The second example that I like to quote here is that of the coal cess. Now, if you see, 2010 is when the first time government actually introduced a tax on coal, which was meant to finance clean energy initiatives. Before that, what used to happen? Corporates would emit CO2 and not pay for the restoration cost or for the efforts that the government or the society would have to put in place to either adapt or mitigate the effects of climate change. But since then, what has happened? Since 2010, when the first time the coal cess was introduced at a 50 rupees per ton, as of now, if you see, that has escalated to 450 rupees a ton. And basically what it means is for every million ton of coal that you're consuming, you're paying off nearly 45 crore rupees, which is a significant amount of money. It is actually value being eroded. And I thank Priya for introducing the concept of value erosion when she was talking about it. It's actual money being eroded from your balance sheet. And naturally, again, the CXO or the C-suite people will have an attention towards it. And how do they reduce that value erosion will be really an important discussion point in the boardroom. So what this basically tells us is that value is a concept which is ever changing. So far, till maybe a decade back, a lot of these factors were not being quantified, not being factored in, and the correct term to be used here is internalized. So far, all of these costs had not been internalized. All of these benefits had not been internalized to the business. So that's the point that's the answer to why a value such impacts. Now coming to the second point, how do you value this? You have to take a more holistic picture. You can't just look at positives and not look at negatives, and vice versa. You have to look at it more holistically. So every impact that you create has positives and negatives. You have to look at it in that sense. And really, if you look at it from the profit and loss perspective, the term itself has positive and negative within itself, right? It talks about profit and loss. So now when you look at integrating sustainability into your profit and loss, it would mean that you would have to factor in both your positive and negative impacts. Now, let me bring it closer to the theme that we are looking at from an Environment Day perspective. When we look at ecosystems, how do you factor in positives and negatives? When you look at ecosystem services, for an example, generally they are classified into 4 types. You have, ecosystem, which are support services. So basically, your ecosystems give you oxygen, they provide hydration and nutrition to the soil. All of those come under the support services. Then you have the provisioning services, which is basically providing us with food, with the medicines and the likes, the resources, raw materials. Then you have cultural services. The way we interact with the ecosystems have also been impacting our culture, the way we behave as a society, etc. And lastly, regulating services, where basically they provide services like pollination, they provide photosynthesis, they provide a kind of a protective wall when there's a cyclone. So all of these services, if you look at them, have a certain inherent value attached to them. And these values get destroyed when you destroy such ecosystem services. When say a real estate project brings down mangrove forests, it's basically destroying value. When a mining company is going back and restoring the entire mined out area, it's basically creating value. So you have to look at both positives and negatives when you're looking at it from an ecosystem services perspective. Also, you have to bring in the dimensions of economic, environmental, and social aspects also into it, because value creation is not just limited to one dimension. It can be looked at from various perspectives. Now, if you look at it, to explain again, basically, if you see right now, the rate at which deforestation or ecosystem service destruction is happening is also still alarming. But at the same time, what is the biggest factor contributing to it? It's agricultural expansion, right? So you are basically converting a certain type of an ecosystem, a certain type of biome into another type of biome. While you are adding economic value, you're destroying environmental value. And that is what you have to look at from the perspective of how important environmental value is becoming now. Naturally, the value of, say, a pristine forest compared to a farmland would be much greater, and thereby net you are actually destroying value. So when you look at factoring in these aspects into a profit and loss of a company, you have to look at it from both the perspectives. How much of ecosystem services are you destroying, and how much of it you are restoring? Take a balanced approach of that and then factor it in. Why would you do that? Basically, right now, it's not being factored in, but definitely in the future, the way things are progressing, at some point in time, there is a risk of internalization which might hit you, and you better be prepared right now rather than do it later. Now, there's also one underlying challenge here, which I would like to point out, and there is this issue of quantification and attribution. So far, the methodology that have been introduced, the methodologies like natural capital protocol or ecosystem services framework, have not been adequate or prescriptive enough for companies to follow or adopt. Simply, there is lack of enough contextual data, and that's where I think we need to work as a group. All of us as sustainability professionals have to streamline, have to integrate, in the words of Priya, have to integrate this consciousness into the way we look at strategies, in the way we look at data collection, in the way we look at monitoring of different aspects. Only then and only then we will have a more holistic view of how much value we are creating and destroying. I would like to conclude there, and definitely would be happy to take any questions post our discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for speaking from both perspective of concern as well as from the industry's point of view. You explained, what could be CEO looking for, when we pitch in a sustainability project. So it's helpful for everybody who has participated in this meeting, and maybe there would be some Q&A questions to you at the end. So thank you for the discussion, and I want to move on to Kalyan Bhaskar, sir. Yes. Yeah. So, sir, I have some set of questions to you, given that you have academia background as well as 1 minute, sir. So, academia background as well as your expertise in public policy. So, as per you, what is the role of ecosystem restoration in the grand universe of sustainability? And also, given the current government that we are having, so what is the Indian government's policy on ecosystem restoration, and how is it aligned with the global, goals that we are having as SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals and the target of 2030? So, how are they aligned?
Okay, thank you, Sriram, for that lovely question. Too many points I have to cover. But what I will do is I will start from where Ashish left. Ashish talked about ecosystem services. And that is a topic that I discuss in my courses, and I give example of the location, Accelerite, where I come from, in Jamshedpur. And I give example of that when people step out from Accelerite to the other parts of Jamshedpur, whether it is Sakchi or whether it is Bistipur, the moment they come to Accelerite, any month of the year, they realize there is a dip in temperature. It is not as hot in this part as it is in the other part of the city. And I ask the students, what could be the reason for that? And then the answer comes probably because of about 4,000 trees in Jubilee Park. We are joining Jubilee Park. For those of you who are not familiar with Jamshedpur, we have a park, Jubilee Park, which is constructed and still maintained by Tata Steel, which houses about 4,000 odd trees, amongst the largest such open public parks in India. And within our XLRI campus also, we have close to 2,000 odd trees. A combination of these trees, what it does is, apart from every other thing that the trees provide, the oxygen, everything else, it provides you shade. It provides you lower ambient temperature. And how does it translate into savings for people like us on XLRI campus? Let's say if I talk my example, I don't use AC as much. Even on today, 5th June, temperature is hitting 38, 39 degrees. I don't require AC throughout the day. Maybe once in a day or twice in a day. And beyond this July, I would not need it. Why is it so? A lot of it is because of the services that this ecosystem provides us. This shade, this joy, this happiness, which is not traded in the market. And when we have to value this ecosystem valuation, any technique, then it becomes difficult to value these services which are not created in the market. These examples came when the new Mumbai airport, Navi Mumbai airport was being constructed, when the issue was of relocation of mangroves, that how do you quantify the services provided by those mangroves? These issues again rose, I think, 1.5 years back when the RA forest controversy broke out. Should we have metro park construction there or not? And closer to us in Jharkhand, again, this issue came out last year when the state government wants to construct a new airport, about 60 kilometers from Jamshedpur, and that needed about 100 hectares of forest land to be felled, which comes under the Elephant Corridor. So again, a narrative of growth versus development. So there were some who say we need airport, and for that maybe we need to sacrifice those elephant corridors or those forests. And then the other side, no, we need to preserve those forest, elephant corridor, those forests. About 80,000 trees would have been to be felled by that. And the Indian government did not give this project the green signal, asking the project planners to come out with a different sort of, maybe different layout, different planning, and different idea for this airport. I'll take some more examples before I come to answer Sriram's question. There is a new documentary that came out 2 months back on Netflix, Seaspiracy. It is, let's say, C plus conspiracy, Seaspiracy. And some of my students suggested me to watch this documentary. I went to this documentary, and I would strongly suggest all of you, if you have access to Netflix, to go watch this documentary. This documentary essentially talks about marine ecosystem, that how our desire for exploiting marine ecosystem for whether whales or whether some other types of fishes, sharks, dolphins, tunas across the globe, in Australia, around China and Japan, in North Atlantic, all of that, how that is leading to destruction of marine ecosystem, and how then that is linked to our excessive plastic consumption, our materialistic consumption, unsustainable ways of consumption, and why marine ecosystem preservation is so important, because it is the largest carbon sink in the world. So no amount of trees can absorb as much carbon as the marine. Earth is what, 75% water. So this documentary has created a lot of controversy. It's led to a lot of heated debate. All the celebrities have shared their opinion about this documentary. And this is one documentary that I'm going to now use at least for the next few years in my courses, so sort of as a mandatory part. More than, so I am a strong believer that you learn more from these videos and documentaries than you learn from these textbooks. Now let me take other examples. COVID-19. Now there's a last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, there has been a lot of topic, where does the virus came from? Now there is a new virus lab leak theory. Did it leak intentionally or unintentionally from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? How much did Anthony Fauci know? How much did other Dr. Peter Daszak know? And all what? And the US government 2 weeks back announced a setting up of a new commission, which has been given 90 days time to find out where this virus came from. Now we don't know yet, and we might not know for sure, maybe even in future, where does it come from conclusively. But what increasingly evidence is pointing out, that COVID infections, this incidence of COVID infection and the severity of COVID infection, that is positively related to ambient air quality and air pollution. And there have been many papers that have come out in US and National Institute of Health, then hosted at Harvard, hosted at Oxford journals, where the researchers have talked about that the risk of mortality is linked with comorbidities, especially your cardiovascular and pulmonary infections. And those risks are related to the air quality in that city. So the paper talks about that globally 15% deaths can be explained because of air quality. So those COVID, along with living in a more polluted environment, leads to more likelihood of you having more severe infection or you perhaps not surviving. And this is a theme that will be under this increased scrutiny even in times to further, as we try to decipher what happened because of COVID, whether it came from lab or not, how does it impact us, and why, let's say, Delhi has so many deaths rate. Is it because of more pollution in Delhi? We don't know yet, so it's not correct for us to join the dots right now. But these incidents, the more we do this research, the more we find out, perhaps we'll get a closer example of, again, how important the air quality, the air pollution, and the tree cover is for us. So what do these examples tell us? These examples, whether it is Seaspiracy documentary, whether it is RA Forest, whether it is the new airport, whether this is COVID, these examples tell us that the topics like sustainability or ecosystem restoration, land degradation, these are not just topics for a webinar on World Environment Day, or these are not just topics for a conferences or academics paper. I remember about 7 years back when I was in the process of writing, co-authoring a paper on electric vehicles in India, future for electric vehicles in India. It was 2013-14, we started the work. And then there were some eminent scientists and researchers from other technical institutes in India who were thinking, oh, well, this is too futuristic a scenario for India. But why are you talking about electric vehicle in India when we don't have electricity access, we don't have enough vehicle population, where will the roads, where will the charging infrastructure? And look at what has happened in the last 7 years. Electric vehicles have moved from a scientific conference paper to today's first page headline in our newspapers, whether vernacular dailies or English dailies. Because now everyone knows that this is electric two-wheeler, electric three-wheeler, electric cars, electric buses. Different state governments have come out with different set of incentives to incentivize that. So all of this, what it tells us, that these topics in the next decade, because the theme for the webinar today is looking forward to 2030, increasingly these topics will be a day-to-day conversation topic. And these will not just be restricted to classrooms and academic seminars and webinars. What is ecosystem restoration? Ecosystem restoration combines a lot of things, one of which is, let's say, protection of degraded lands, lands that have degraded because of excessive mining, because of excessive fertilizer intensive agriculture practices, because of water drying up, water tables going down. So how do you reclaim and protect those degraded lands? How do you grow more trees inland and on the coast? How do you green our cities, again linked with air quality and air pollution? How do you allow our gardens preserve those public places like Jubilee Park, not let it be encroached by, let's say, the construction mafia, which comes and simply pulls. So I have multiple examples. I spent some of my time in Ranchi also. And I have seen Ranchi grow, how after becoming capital of Jharkhand in the last 20 years, it is increasingly becoming more concrete jungle. 20 years back, or even 30 years back, Ranchi used to be the summer capital of Bihar. And now increasingly you see temperatures going up, but still it is much less than the other part. So how do you preserve those open public spaces? All of this will come under ecosystem restoration. Talking about the Sustainable Development Goal, there are 17 set of Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is explicitly linked to this theme, that is SDG 15, life on land. So how do you preserve life on land? How do you preserve the ecosystem around us? Which is again sub-linked to other sub-themes. So let's say you cannot have good health and well-being when your ecosystem gets destroyed. You cannot have any sustainable city and communities when your ecosystem gets destroyed. Climate action, any talk of preventing NOx, SOx, or carbon monoxide emissions cannot be done if you ignore the focus on ecosystem. Similarly, this will require extreme partnership. Ashish, Shrija, and Priya and others have talked about how it is important to have partnership between business, civil society, and let's say academia and government. And this we are increasingly seeing theme around us. So that partnership will be required. A link part to this part Gaurav mentioned about the work, the excellent work JUSCO is doing. So I was out of Jamshedpur for 2 months. I left in March, and when I came back in May, there are some waste dumps around XLRI, and I was pleasantly surprised to see all turn green, and I realized what happened. It appears that JUSCO has done something and completely covered this with some fast-growing variety of some species. Now suddenly it is not as dusty as it was earlier. The landscape has completely changed. So how do we prevent waste management, whether it is through AI and others, because that is important. Often this waste, if you don't treat it properly, it lands up in landfills and then gets it's lying here and there. So how do we preserve that? The single-use plastic ban announced by our Prime Minister in 2019, so just before the onset of COVID, that was a strong move. I think India was among the leading countries in the world to announce a ban on single-use plastic ban. Now, because of this pandemic, maybe that would have slowed down the responses by companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. But you would see once this COVID eases, more push on that, the new policy on end-of-life vehicle recycling. So all of our vehicle automobiles lying junk here and there, so those will be recycled. Strong push on circular economy in the month of March 2021. NITI Aayog has constituted 11 committees to promote circular economy, to transition India from linear economy to circular economy. And these 11 committees are headed by different nodal ministries and departments, and they look at different sub-themes. So one of the sub-themes is, let's say, electronic waste. I am a part of one of those committee, where we are essentially talking about how to make Atmanirbhar Bharat, or to make India a manufacturing hub. We need to essentially efficiently recycle material from these end-of-life products, whether it is electronic waste, whether it is end-of-life vehicles, because what it will do, it will save our foreign money. We will not need to import as much, but we will also not need to mine as much virgin materials. So if we can recycle steel, we may not need to fell more trees and to mine fresh virgin material. So those recycling circular economy, the government is doing on that. Extended producer responsibility. So that has come up in a big way, and that is linked to waste management, and that is linked to, again, preservation of ecosystem. Then I think India has given a target to SDGs, talking about the policies, Indian government policies. When the SDGs were announced in 2015, Indian government said that in the next 15 years, that is by 2030, India will reduce emission intensity, that is emission per GDP, by 33 to 35% by 2030. The latest figure I was checking, the government said that India has reduced it by 21% by December 2020. From the target of 33 to 35%, we have reached 21% by December 2020. In the next 10 years, we have to bring it down further. Then there are Swachh Bharat mission, Namami Gange mission, electric vehicle mission, solar mission, the focus on public transportation, metros, all of which is indirectly and directly linked to ecosystem restoration. Then we have a 450 gigawatt renewable energy target by 2030, among the most ambitious targets globally by any country. Then some states in India, even states like Chhattisgarh, which sits on a pile of coal reserves, they have announced that they will not build new coal power plants. And in the next decade, the Union Minister for Power, R.K. Singh, announced in the month of October that this decade, 2021 to 2030, it is estimated that 29 coal power plants will be retiring in India that will not be replaced by new coal power plants. So you have existing coal power plants which will run its life, and they will not be reconstructed. They will not, the technology will not be upgraded, and they will not use coal after that. So that is happening. As a percentage of total power, coal today accounts for about 70 to 75% of power production. That share is expected to dip to 50% by 2030, as per Indian government estimates. But it may not lead to absolute reduction in coal consumption, because our overall energy demand will go up. So there, the focus on renewable energy target, electric vehicles, public transportation will play a major role. I think what will be important for India, and what might be interesting development for India to watch, is increasingly there will be global pressure on India to announce some targets. Let's say just a month back, European Union announced its targets of being completely carbon neutral by 2050. China has announced that it will have its peak carbon emissions by somewhere in 2035. And increasingly, world over, people are expecting Indian government also to announce something. So if you're talking about a theme of the next decade, I think this is one space where we can expect more pressure to come up to India, and maybe Indian government might be in a position to announce some of these quantified targets of peak emissions or carbon neutral emissions, maybe sometime later this year. So with that, I thank you all for giving me time, and I'm open to all the questions.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for explaining the public policy which is happening in the last few years, and especially showcasing the correlation between various angles of sustainability. I mean, especially when you talk about COVID and the relation between air quality and COVID, I think that makes a lot of sense, because we see a lot of deaths happening in Delhi. Someone personal to me also was part of that, and we can also see something happening. Polluted cities nearby Delhi and in Varanasi and nearby areas. I think that makes a lot of sense when you talk about that. So, I think we are moving to the end of this segment, and we will move on to the Q&A in some time. So, I guess till now we had a lot of discussion happening where from the industry we clearly heard from Srijamala ma'am that industry wants to avoid risks, and the current incentives for the industry is to reduce the risk, financial, environmental, reputational risk, and that's how sustainability is currently running. And Priya ma'am pointed out that now we need to uh, so now we need to make some changes, and rather than going for trade-offs, integration is the right way to go. And that's how moving forward we would have a right output for sustainability. And we also heard Ashish Ranjan sir speaking on to get that integration going on, we need to make sure everything is in the same platform, and that is ideally financial. I mean, that's the language that all of us can clearly understand. So when we show the financial perspective of sustainability, that's some way that we can move forward and ensure the sustainability is there in everything. And we also had Kalyan Bhaskar sir speaking right now and talking about correlation between various pillars of sustainability, how one aspect can affect the other aspect, and also what the government has been doing in the last few years as public policy, which is finally incentivizing all the players to do something. I mean, it is motivating the consumers, it is motivating the companies, the consultancies, all the players who are involved in this. And we also saw from Gaurav Anand sir how we can go beyond and above, especially township management or other departments of government. They can utilize technology, and how we can go beyond reducing the risks or reducing negative impacts, and do some positive change for the environment. So I think we had a very, very good discussion today where we covered various aspects, and rather than going one dimensional, we were able to get the whole picture and idea of sustainability and ecosystem restoration. So now I think we can move on to Q&A. So anybody from the audience, if they have any questions to any of the panel members, you can start the question now. Yes, Satya, I saw that. Yes, Satyendra, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Satyendra. I'm also from Nitty only. I'm right now working in More Retail Limited. It was previously Aditya Birla Retail Limited. Then it is acquired by Samara Capital and Amazon. So basically, my question to Mr. Ashish Ranjan. Hello, sir. I don't know if you remember. Of course, you won't remember me. You also came for our SIP, by the way. So my question is, sir, as you're talking about this ecosystem sustainability and all, so from your vast experience of expanding ESG vertical, who drives ecosystem sustainability? As because recently when Samara and Amazon acquired MRL, so they have done ESG ESG audit for our firm, and I'm handling EHS. I'm working as EHS in charge there, so I was also taking care of that. So basically, my question is, expanding ESG vertical, who drives ecosystem sustainability? And while there would be many incentives and pressure from various stakeholders, and what is the primary incentive for the company to do good for the incentives? And second question, I was just also 2-3 days back, I also reading about IFC performance standards. So what do you think? Which is better, or is there we can do comparative study between IFC performance standard and ESG standard?
Okay, so starting with your first question, generally it's a very context specific. Who owns the ecosystem services part in an organization? Generally, what we have seen in manufacturing setups, it's the environment division, with a lot of support coming in from the process side of it as well. Like if you have a mining function within the organization, the mining function is very well entrenched into the overall ecosystem protection and the restoration process as well. And in case it's not mining, then production as well is pretty much involved in it. The idea is it cannot be just one department on one function working towards it. You would also have to have contributions from different other functions, like community services is also now playing a large role in enabling ecosystem restoration, given the interaction that local communities also have with the local ecosystems as well. So that's the first part. The second one, was basically with respect to IFC standards you mentioned. So IFC performance standards are basically becoming a reference point for almost all investors who are investing into new projects which have the potential of causing environmental or social impacts. And these are all considered to be ESG investors, so they become a reference point for these investors to look into a new project which is being installed. Are there going to be environmental or social impacts for those projects? So it's not a question of which is better. ESG is basically not something that is compartmentalized into a very small sector. ESG is all pervasive, so it applies to almost every sector that you could talk about. So ESG itself is not a standard. ESG manifests into various kinds of standards. IFC performance standards could be one of those. You have many others coming in, like you have the SASB sector materiality. You have other financial institutions who have adopted those and made them their own, like in the European Union. Now you have the sustainable finance disclosure standards coming in. So it's basically ESG is a large umbrella, and within that you will have manifestations as per fit for purpose for each sector, each geography, etc. So I think that's my response to your second question. Was there something that I missed? If you can just highlight that.
It is fine.
I hope you, okay, fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shriram. And also, as you are discussing, so recently I'm also home. So recently, like I also became, like my family also became COVID positive, and I'm also right now living in one of the most polluted city you are just mentioning in India, Moradabad, nearby Delhi. So yeah, this is actually my personal concern.
Yes. Thank you, Satya, and thank you. Sir, you're on mute. I think you're on mute.
Sorry. I hope you're better now, you and your family.
Yes, sir. It happened last month.
Okay.
So I just mentioned because Shriram just mentioned about the pollution and all, COVID and all. So that's why I mentioned. Right now, actually, my family actually lives in Moradabad, UP. So actually, when I'm working in this field only, sustainability and all. So when I go back to my city, I see, because it is famous for its brass work. So Moradabad is famous for it is also called brass capital, Pital Nagri. So so when I see so many industries, and like it's a small city, still its pollution index is much higher. Like it generally comes in top 5, top 10 easily. So so actually I always try to see what I can do, if I can do anything better, which can improve at least my city.
Yes, thank you, Satya, and thank you for asking this question, and thank you, Ashish sir, for clearing this. So one more person, Rahul Gupta, has some questions. So Rahul Gupta, if you can ask it now, it would be great.
Yeah, so that's me, Rahul. So I'm actually even a NITI pass out. I passed in the year 2018 and currently working as a demand supply planner with one of the pharma organization based out of Gurgaon, which is basically into pharma drug manufacturing. So I just wanted to understand from a curriculum perspective from Kalyan Basu sir, that are the courses in India well equipped to actually train professionals and bring out professionals into the market to help companies adopt to sustainable practices, means do the transformation which is needed actually to be more sustainable in long term, and also transform their overall business into a direction which actually means it's environmental friendly, means focuses on things like reducing carbon footprint and all.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul, for that very interesting question. That is a question we have discussed in our circle a lot during the time I have been in academics. So I was earlier with IIM Lucknow. They had launched a new program, postgraduate program in sustainable management in 2015. So I was associated for 2 years with that program, handling teaching projects as well as placement for that program. I've also taught sustainability course at IIM Indore and doing so now at XLRI. So one line question, answer to your question is no. Indian B schools currently are not adequately prepared to handle the emerging sustainability implications in the Indian management field, business field. The correct answer is, one-line answer is no. And the reason is, so they are still in that evolving phase. So every institute is trying to get a feedback from the industry, trying to see what all it can incorporate in the course. Now, courses which are exclusively focused on sustainable management, just like in NITI or Xavier University Bhubaneswar or at IIM Lucknow, and even at Terry University Delhi. So they have tried, so about 60-70% elements are common, the subjects are common, though there is a difference. So when do you introduce the core courses? When do you introduce the let's say elective courses? What should be taught in those courses? How much should be the industry practitioner's point of view? How much should be the academia point of view? Now, should it be restricted to EHS? If you look into Indian industry, traditionally companies have a EHS department, Environmental Health and Safety Department, and often when they create sustainability department, it is people from this EHS department who go on to head that sustainability department. But sustainability theme, the corporate sustainability goes beyond EHS, where you look into the strategy aspect also. So what elements should you bring into that course? That's something all 4 colleges are trying to do the best in that part. The limitations of places like Accelerate or IIM Indore, where sustainability is one course. So it's not a sustainability focused management program. There's one course, but increasingly what I can say for Accelerate, at least there is an attempt to introduce or discuss sustainability in every other course that is taught in a first year program. So that the students get this idea that sustainability is just not for a sustainability department. So the CEO can be from sustainability vertical, or the chief marketing officer should know about what is ethical consumption, what is sustainable consumption. So that emphasis I increasingly see if I look into the course curriculum revision that has happened at IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Calcutta, IIM Bangalore in the last 6 years, after 2015-16. I think all of those institutes have blended courses on environment, governance systems, and sustainability in their first courses, which is a reflection of the feedback they have received from the industry that these are increasingly courses that will be required for future Indian management leaders, future Indian business leaders. So I think we are on that path. But today, your answer, no, we don't adequately prepare students for that.
Sure, sir. Means I definitely got your answer. So means I was just thinking means at what level industry and academia could collaborate so that some means outcome could be seen in next 5-10 years down the line, at least. Means what level of collaboration is required? Since
I think so. So again, there are different modes for collaboration. So at IIM Lucknow, I think there was a 9-month industry project where the student was supposed to do a project with one of those industries in the sustainability domain. And then there will be a periodic evaluation by a faculty. Then you can have guest faculty. So I have had Priya Ranjan as a guest faculty who just taught about what Tata Steel does on the sustainability front. So those industry practitioners bring the industry knowledge, and then that can spark curiosity or spark some drive among the students. Then we can have some, again, a group project where students go through, or let's say mimic or track sustainability movements of a country, or do a market research about a particular new thing that is to be come up. So I think there are different avenues for joint offering of a course, or let's say KPMG, where Ashish comes from. So I think Prathamesh and Santosh and others. So they regularly do periodic courses on sustainability audit, sustainability reporting, and others. So I think avenues where B schools graduates can go and attend those courses and get those certifications. Perhaps those avenues can also be there. So I think those are avenues, and I think all the B schools are doing something or the other regarding this. No B school, the 4-5 I took example, is exclusively focused on the classroom content itself, but sustainability is an evolving field, and then there needs to be a strong interface with the business.
Sure, sir. So I got definitely the answer that was there.
Yes. So thank you, Rahul Gupta, for this wonderful question, and also thank you, sir, for explaining what are the changes happening in the academia. And I'm happy to see that all the colleges are involving industries more, and it is not just isolated theoretical lessons which is being imparted. So anybody else having question?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Very good afternoon. This is Shivangi. So firstly, I would like to thank all the panel members for this very informative session. In fact, we got a very complete and holistic view of the topic, hearing from all the different perspectives. So it was indeed a great session. And I actually have a question for you, Gaurav Anand, sir. So, we talked about the activities which you keep doing throughout the city, and there are so many people who benefit from that. So, drawing from your phenomenal examples, what can we do as a citizen to contribute to our environment?
Yeah, Shivangi, thank you for your question. A citizen has a big responsibility to restore this ecosystem. What I talked about, like we should aim to plant more and more trees in the city, in the areas like which are inaccessible, where we can throw some seed balls and see some plants growing. We can identify some water bodies which are dying, where water quality is deteriorating. The water is depleting. We can save those water bodies. We can also educate people about how to segregate waste at source, how to compost at home, how to harvest the rainwater, which is we are not doing it at present. Like, although this is a government norm that every new building which is being constructed has to have a rainwater harvesting system in their premises, but you'll hardly see 3% or 2% complying to that. So we can start educating them. We can start telling them that it is not very tough to do. You can give examples of some of the countries, like there are some countries like in Helsinki, the capital of Finland. There will not be any personal car by 2025. They are targeting. Britain and France has targeted that they will have zero greenhouse gas emission, and for that they have the action plan also. So we have not reached that far that we can copy them, but yes, we can start with the small activities. We can take these two rivers, like which is there in Jamshedpur and which is there in your area, and we can save them. Because we have seen already during this pandemic, like what is the value of oxygen. And we if we go back to the village, we'll see that our grandparents had planted some trees, out of which we are having mangoes and other fruits now, but we have not planted anything there. So our grandchildren will not have mangoes from the plant. So we should start taking small steps in whichever direction. Like Kalyan Bhaskar sir also talked about a lot of areas, like where individual, where community, where corporates can make a difference. So first of all, identifying where it needs human intervention. We can save the wildlife sanctuaries by planting some sacred groves of fruit trees, where we talk of Dalma, and Dalma is famous for elephant. It is known as elephant corridor also. But presently, if you compare it from last 10 years data, the number of elephants are getting, it is getting lower and lower. So what is the main problem? What is the main issue behind that? We should focus on that. We should identify those issues and then work on that. So as an individual, we can work on so many issues together, and we should not work in silos. Like previously, what used to happen, like Raghav sir, Ashish sir also answered one of the questions, where one person looks after the environment thing in a company. So actually, every department, every the operating function has something to do with the environment. So everybody should work in close coordination if they want some improvement in this field. So people are working at present in silos. That's why हम लोग बोलते हैं कि जो ये मेरा काम नहीं है, ये तो environment जो देख रहा है केवल उसका काम है. So that's why this issue is pertaining. So we should learn from the developed countries what issues उन्होंने कैसे उसको tackle किया है, and accordingly we should also take baby steps to take care of the environment.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So, I'll try to implement this definitely.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And that's one of the most difficult part. I mean, we all might be doing something inside our home, planting a tree. That was what we are planning for the day. But having a program like river cleaning drive and getting so much people together and doing it weeks after week like you have done, it's kind of difficult, and it is something that we all should do. Even I think the other panel members are also doing a lot of activities. Personally, even Ashish Ranjan sir has skilling Manji skilling development NGO in which he helps people get skilled. So a lot of things that if you are doing it in an organizational way and if you are pulling in more people together, that would be of tremendous help. And we are almost at the end of discussion. We do not want to extend it further, so we'll take one last question. Yes, Parnika, you can be the last member to ask the questions. And just one more thing before that, I request everybody to fill the form, feedback form, which has been posted in the chat, so that we have the attendance and we also get some feedback regarding this particular panel discussion and what all we can improve. So I will once again post it in the chat and request everybody to fill the form. So yes, Parnika, I request you to please ask your question.
Hi, my name is Parnika and I'm a law student from BHU. First off, I would like to thank you all for this amazing, insightful session. And my question is for Srija ma'am. So I wanted to know, what is the impact of environmental legislation to the extent that we also have the National Green Tribunal in creating awareness among the citizens?
Thank you, Parnika. It's actually a very good and very broad question. Actually, if you see in terms of your national tribunal and how they are playing role in educating citizens. So I cannot say that cannot directly relate like how their legal laws are there and how it is being educating people, but certainly the driver has started from there. If you see the laws, the way it has been modified in last your post Bhopal gas tragedy, and also policies, different policies are coming to India. And as other panel members has talked about how different policies are coming and how we are adopting to the policies similar in similar way, people are started talking about it. And I believe like today's current generation, they are much more aware. If you see the curriculum like in the engineering college or even in the student in the schools, some topics are now started including about environment. If you see the kind of advertisements or the kind of like kind of information now we are getting, the most important factor is now today generation is super connected. What's happening in Australia, what's happening in US, they know about it. We were not that much connected. And in terms of awareness, even a small decision taken from legal perspective, or a small decision taken in US, like how it's happening, we know about it. Generation knows about it. Now they are started asking question. So many young people, we have not seen them representing in the UN and talking about sustainability, talking about or demanding like what we have from you, what you are leaving for us. So that kind of awareness is actually happening. Is it what you're asking, or if I have deviated from your question?
No, ma'am, this is what I was asking actually, because I wanted to know the impact.
Yeah, thanks, Parnika.
No, thank you, ma'am.
Shriram, you're on mute.
Well, I'm really sorry. I was speaking. So thank you, sir. So thank you, ma'am, for covering this important topic of legislature, and thank you, Parnika, for asking, because that's what's something that we have been missing. When you talked about public policy, we missed the link between public policy, the legislature which has come up, and the impact on industry. So once again, thank you, ma'am, for clearing that out. And so yes, so we are at the end of this session. And once again, thank you all the panel members for coming and giving this wonderful having this wonderful discussion for all of us. And we have various listeners from varying background, and I'm pretty sure that people like Priya ma'am, Ashish sir, Shrija ma'am, Gaurav sir, and Kalyan Bhaskar sir give a very varying perspective for everybody who's here, and added a lot of value. So I have given my
You went on mute again, sorry.
Okay, thank you for telling me that. So I was mentioning that once again, I want to thank all the panel members who have given a very value-adding discussion. And I have given my name, email, and phone number in the chat. So in case, any of you that who are having any kind of questions, or if you have some further questions on this particular topic, then, you can please reach out to me, or in any way you think that, I can be of assistance, please feel free to reach out to me. And once again, I want to thank all the members, Ashish sir, Priya ma'am, Srijamala ma'am, Gauravanand sir, and Kalyan Bhaskar sir, and looking forward to the next panel discussion and much more enriching sessions like this. Thank you everyone who joined.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sriram, for organizing this and having me on the panel. It was really a genuine pleasure being in the presence of all these august panel members. Thanks a lot for sharing your perspectives, Priya, Kalyan, Gaurav, and Shrija. It was something that I'll take back. A lot of inputs that you've given have been very useful.
Thank you,
So,
everyone.
thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
It was wonderful
Thank
to
you,
have.
everyone.
Thank you to everyone, and it was great catching up with everyone after a long time. I was just noticing in between the panel discussion that all the fellow panelists, I have worked with them in some way or the other, with each one of you. In fact, with Shrija, we've just kick-started a project on 3rd June. So it's wonderful to be in touch, and I personally feel blessed to be in the company of such knowledgeable and inspired people. Sustainability needs more inspiration than knowledge. So that is what we are, and let's hope that we continue to have such sessions in the future, and we make a difference to the existing state of affairs. So thank you very much, and thank you, Sriram, and your team for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sriram. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.